being interviewed in the documentary and the things that they're saying. It's disconcerting to say the least.
Yep, when you look at what you're up against, it does seem that way, doesn't it?
Mm.
But I must say, I do think common sense will win the day. I think they just, you know, they're up against, how should I say, something natural, right? And it must be very difficult to continuously put something completely artificial on top of something that's natural, is at least my bigger hope, right? That the natural thing will shine through. You know, every new generation is still going to be born with reason and common sense, and you know, it's only until they get into the system that they get educated. So, you know,
Well, that's the problem. Getting them out of the system is going to be a serious issue. Although it might just be that the whole system will implode anyway, and it'll go back to, you know, where it should be. I mean, that's another thing too. I mean, I'm sort of saying it in a negative sort of a way, you know, that it's a bit despairing to see that we've got nothing and they've got so much. But the fact of the matter is, we've got the truth.
yeah, we've got facts. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got natural laws and all kinds of things in our side.
Yeah, they've got to keep spending billions of dollars making up stuff.
Yep.
You know, I mean, just the amount of money that must be spent in maintaining the ISS joke.
Although that looks just to be a paper mache model, you know. I mean, there was a couple of videos from that guy, Level Earth Observer, and he's quite right. It just looks like an Airfix model, you know. It's something you would put together with glue in your back bedroom, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, talking about it from that point of view, but from the point of view of the show that they put on,
yeah,
you know, I mean,
through the media coverage, the spin, the science educators, you know, the clowns that they have to bring on. You know, I mean, I'm sure that's a tag team anyway. You know, like, you know, these kind of people who pretend to be scientific skeptics, and then the clown shows like, you know, Tyson and Nye and Simon Flamf. You know, it's all nicely set up so that there's clowns to tell, you know, bits of nonsense and personality, and then you've got these more serious academics that, you know, write articles that, you know, it's just we are up against it. Don't get me wrong.
Well, we're up against it, but like I say, we've got the truth, and we don't have to spend billions of dollars to try and present our story.
Yeah, that's true.
We've only just got to talk about it. And I mean, why there aren't thousands upon thousands of academics and scientists questioning the ISS stuff is amazing to me. Why aren't they questioning that these people are floating around in this thing? I mean, the logistics for a start, you know, keeping the place tidy. Nobody seems to think about these things. You know, they're always wearing clean, just pressed clothing.
The cleaning lady just delivers it to the ISS, right, via the Russian rockets and the Chinese cooperation. Yeah. Probably the Chinese do the laundry, or sorry, that was maybe was probably not a very clever thing to say. Nothing against the Chinese, of course.
Well, Chinese are famous for their laundries.
Yeah.
That whole I mean, it comes back to, I mean, I must have said it a million times now, well, quite a few times, that everything you look at is so astoundingly absurd, and yet it's accepted by the majority of academics and scientists, let alone the general public.
Yeah, I mean, I still try to think what it was like before, you know, we came to this realization. And again, I mean, they're just not attending to the problem, right? They're not looking closer, you know, at any of those videos that we see online, or, you know, like floppy doors and bubbles in space and rats and rockets, and, you know, I mean, the whole thing's just preposterous as soon as you see it. But if you're not looking for it, you're just not attentive, right? I mean, so and then again, they're lost in their world of mathematical physics. You know, so they're perfectly happy to have it all proved to them in papers and models, and so there's no need to look for further evidence, right? It's definitely
Actually,
very walled off, you know.
one of the things that's amazing or interesting about this this Einstein documentary is the number of times that they say he thought he had it right, but he had it wrong. He made this mistake and he did this. And then he did this series of lectures. And every lecture that he made, he had to correct the mistakes he'd made in the previous lecture. And you know, he wasn't really a mathematician.
He was a storyteller.
Yeah, when he was back at school, when he was at the university, he got his mate so-and-so, who was a brilliant mathematician, to study the geometry for him. Bullshit! You know?
It's all just stories, isn't it? You can see through the fact that it's just stories. I mean,
Yeah.
You sent me a link to that Einstein thing, and I did look at the part that you sent me where they were trying to prove general relativity by looking at, you know, visibles in space or visibles up in the sky. And I mean, it's absolutely nonsense, as you pointed out. Eddington and Campbell, I think, that were, you know, going out to take photographs to prove it at an eclipse, that there would be some kind of visible phenomena measurable in millimeters, right, on photographic plates, and that this was going to prove that that space-time was warping, you know, light and bodies, right? And it's just you know, even the way they tell the story, you know, as you say, the clouds opening up at the right time, and, you know, having to use shoddy equipment, but he still managed it somehow, you know. So you've got all these little embellishments, right, to make it sound more truthful, the same way a liar does it, right? I mean, if you're going to lie, you've got to embellish things and kind of sidetrack people away from the truth. So you talk about these arduous physical treks to Egypt and the Andes and South America, and, you know, packs of slaves carrying chains and bulbs, and, you know, it just, the whole thing is just so obviously just stories, you know?
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, what are you supposed to get? This measurable proof of some visible, right? I mean, and that says it all. I mean, that brings it again back home, as far as I'm concerned, that this definition of mathematics and measurement and ratio and quantity, if we don't get that right, you can be told any shite, you know? You really can be told any shite.
I was thinking about it in terms too of demonstration. You know, we were talking about demonstration last week.
Yeah.
Quod
erat demonstrandum,
yeah, they're trying to claim it as a demonstration when it's nothing of the sort.
No.
And I'd be interested. I mean, are they still doing those things today? Is it like the Cavendish experiment? Like, it was done one time, they got their little formula from it, and it seems like the same story again. They have somebody do some ridiculous experiment that's supposed to be a demonstration, and they end up with an equation, and that equation is then, like, you know, there's these guys in this bit that I'm watching in part 3 of the Einstein one, where they've got the equation written up on the wall: G sub blah 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 equals something blah 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 blah, and, you know, it's only a very short. And this equation describes the entire universe. What?
The arrogance of them, isn't it? I mean, it really is. Either they know they're putting on a show and it's all pish, or they're just literally so arrogantly believing in their mathematical physics, you know. One of the two, isn't it?
I'm sure it's the latter.
It's a tag team.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the latter in most cases. In some cases, it's like somebody, well, in another field, in the evolution discussion, Richard Dawkins has had his theories shoved down his, you know, people have been able to point out how wrong he is. And there are so many anti-evolution things around that he must be aware of them. In his position, he must, although somebody told me the other day he's dead.
Well, I mean, every scientist should be aware of people challenging their theories or their experiments, right? And should be taking it up as a normal part of good science, right?
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't do that. It just ignores everything, right?
they must ignore it, because if he didn't ignore it, he would have already had to have changed his story.
Yep.
You cannot go on claiming that intelligent design is ridiculous when it's so obviously not.
Yep.
I mean, his attempt to poo-poo it by his description of the blind watchmaker, you know, calling it the blind watchmaker. I've used it several times. I tell people, I say to people, okay, you believe that this all happened by chance? And they sort of say, well, yeah. So you believe that if you were walking through a desert and you found a ticking watch lying in the middle of the sand, you could be led to believe that somehow or another, over billions of years, some grains of sand worked out or fell together and kept falling together in different arrangements until they produced that watch. Because that's what you believe. If you believe that in evolution, that's what you believe. And it does get people to think a little bit.
Well, it's a good thought experiment to give them, yeah. And the what was it, the jumbo jet, you know, that gets assembled during a tornado from a scrap heap, you know.
Yeah.
There's quite a few good analogies to point out the ridiculousness of that position to hold. Yeah, I mean it's astounding.
And yet it's still, and it's like idealism, still the pervading philosophy.
Yep.
When it's so ridiculous and so obviously ridiculous.
Yep. I mean, there just are these three, if you like, if you want to break down all these philosophical, there's the idealism, then there's the representational theories, and then there's direct realism. And you've got to kind of pick one of them. You can't be in all camps at all times, right?
No.
And the only one to pick is the direct realism one, because everything else is just, you know, fantastical theories and ideas and concepts and mental gymnastics. So yeah, but I do think that Einstein thing really brings it home, you know, how much they have to lie and distort and embellish just to make us believe it, you know.
Yeah. Well, even that paper that you uploaded that you got from Dell.
Yeah, that article, yeah.
Yeah, that same thing. The everything's in double speak or back to front.
Yeah, double speak's a good. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
They're saying common sense. You know that it's common sense. People's common sense tells them that they live on a sphere.
Yeah,
what?
Well, that's it. I've got the article in front of it. It might also be common sense that the Earth is a spheroid for most people. Still, the majority of people have neither perceived the Earth as spherical nor represented it like that. One reason for that is in everyday life context, the illusion of a plane works perfectly well to guide us in the planning and execution of our actions. I mean, it really is doublespeak. It's just sophistry, isn't it? It's just flipped on its head, you know, as if the idiots are the ones that believe that water is level and, you know, you need containment for opposing pressure systems, you know, as if we're the nutters for knowing that. Yeah. But again, that's you know, that's what I think. You know, it's all kind of tag team stuff. You know, you've got this dichotomy. You've got the clowns out there, you know, telling kind of half truths and pseudoscience, and we're allowed to point and laugh and joke and prod them. And then you've got the real philosophers, academics, intellectuals that are kind of set up to show the nonsense of those things. And in doing that, they love to mix it all up and do the doublespeak and, you know, and then you get, you know, and then apparently you're just too stupid to get it, right? You know, you're the plebs are too ignorant to understand an equation. So, okay, well, we'll just give them this analogy, so that they understand it. And then when you point out that it's a false, illogical fallacy that they're using as an analogy, then, you know, the intellectuals have still got that kind of, yeah, but we have to do it that way, otherwise the dumb person doesn't understand, you know? So, you know, they're always couching it in those kind of, you know, I don't know, cheating, dishonest ways, right? And I think people can now see through it, though. God, thank God.
I think they're starting to, yeah.
I don't know what God's got to do with that. That was just a turn of phrase. I'm not a...
No, I'm afraid I think he has got something to do with it, if whoever he is.
Yeah, I'll entertain in all of these thoughts after I find out where the fuck I am. So, but yeah, I mean, I was pointing it out. There's also the one. Hold on, let me just share my screen. There was one thing that I thought was quite worth going down. If I just share this desktop, you should be able to see everything. Yeah, one of the fallacies that I think we discussed this yesterday very briefly, right? Appeal to the stone.
Yep.
Argumentum ad lapidem. And this for me was also an example. So it's a logical fallacy that consists in dismissing a statement as absurd, invalid, or incorrect without giving proof of its absurdity, which is what they tend to do all the time with the flat earth, right? It's easy to ridicule it, call it absurd. You know, we're all mental cases, cavemen, right? No clue. But you know, they can never show us, you know, why, you know, water cannot bend, right? So, and there's another one that goes along. The same applies to proof by assertion, where an unproven or disproved claim is asserted as true, or on no ground other than of its truth having been asserted. Which is what they do all the time. They just keep, you know, repeating the same shite in the hope that it, you know, sinks in to the gullible. Yep. But this whole fallacy appears to me to be also turned on its head, right? Because apparently it comes from the famous incident, where Samuel Johnson, I think speaking to Boswell, refutes Bishop Berkeley's immaterialist philosophy, the one that says there are no material objects, only minds and ideas in those minds. And Johnson kicks a stone and says, I refute it thus. This action, which is said to fail to prove the existence of the stone outside the ideas formed by perception, is said to fail to contradict Berkeley's argument and has been seen as merely dismissing it. Right, and I think, you know, they seem to have missed the point here, or they're doing double speak deliberately, because Bishop Berkeley's immaterialist philosophy, while being very clever in its argumentation, asserting that, you know, okay, because you either believe that there's an internal mind and there's a real objective external world, or you say to yourself, well, my internal mind is not capable of really proving to itself that there is a real external mind, because all I'm getting is sense perceptions. And those sense perceptions are then what Berkeley says are the only things that really exist. We have no real way of knowing that the material world outside exists. Yeah? And I think that's absolute bullshit, right? I think that's pure nonsense. And when Samuel Johnson kicks the stone, you know, it seems to me to be misinterpreting what he was doing. So they're kind of trying to make it out as if this doesn't disprove Berkeley's nonsense, but I think it does very well if you look at exactly what is meant by it. So the people who say it's a fallacy say that, you know, okay, you need to understand what Berkeley meant by sensations. If you were to kick that stone, then you would feel pain, and that's how should I say, not comparable, but compatible with Berkeley's argumentation, because if you don't understand what Berkeley means by words like sensations and perceptions, then you can mix up this story and make it appear to be the other way around. But it's really just a play on words that you have to understand how Berkeley meant it. Whereas my feeling is that kicking a stone does exactly that. It does refute that is a mental thing. Right? I mean, was it Jonathan Swift? Swift apparently used to refuse to open the door to Berkeley because Berkeley believed that it wasn't there. So Swift said, "Fuck you! I'm not going to open the door. You can walk right through it, as you see, as you believe." But the whole thing just appears to me to be twisted on its head. Double speak's quite right the way you said it.
Well, just there where it says that Berkeley's theory, the immaterialist theory, says that there are no material objects, only minds and ideas in those minds. Yep. So obviously kicking a stone and hurting your toe is material.
Absolutely. I mean, it's simple.
Yeah, okay, it's definitely
Children
a sensation.
know this. Idiots know this. Brutes know this. Animals know it. Everything.
Well, you used to say it when we were talking about Reed and common sense, that common sense was so necessary to us in a material world that we live in. Otherwise, we'd never be able to safely cross the road.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, just this appeal to the stone has definitely been flipped on its head, if you ask me. And using this as an example, where I'm pretty sure Samuel Johnson was, basically pointing out that there is a material, external, objective world, right? And not, this is not about a play on words as to why, sensations are not felt and things like that, which is where philosophers like to, get their heads up their arse again.
Yeah, actually, I like the story about Swift not opening the door for him. If you think it's not there, just walk through it.
Yeah, walk through it, right through it, man. I mean, because we've all heard those stories, right, about chairs and tables, and there's so much gaps between the electrons and the protons and the neutrons down there that there is really more nothing than there is anything substantial. And
yeah, well, that's when you start getting into the quantum baloney.
Yeah, which is a kind of middle ground between it being purely immaterial and being material. It's like a kind of fudge in between those two ideals or these two philosophies, and it's just as ridiculous.
They still claim their particles are material, don't they?
Yep.
Or in most cases.
And again,
are they still arguing about whether they're waves or particles?
Yep. And I mean, we know, if you just look at it from a big picture, this whole idea of relativity and quantum mechanics, if I pull this right down to the end, the relative part is all about you being at the center of your own world or your own space, whether it's the visible space or the physical space, everything goes from each individual, right? Whether it's a direction from you, whether it's the visible world that you're looking at, whether it's the physical area you're in. That's the relative part, and then you've got this quantum mechanics, which is again about quantifying stuff in motion, right? Or the explaining, how stuff moves. So you can see how it's just, the story or the narrative just gets morphed to suit whatever the prevailing mathematical theory is. With none of them have got any physical QED. None of them.
No. It's like when we were talking about the Einstein. The warping of space-time around the sun, the way that they did those experiments that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
The I forget what I was going to say.
The coincidences that came from it, or the fact that they could take photos, or no?
More about. Actually, did we already discuss that it was a demonstration? Yeah, we have. We already did that.
Yep.
It was an attempt at, a claimed demonstration. And they keep doing that sort of thing. They keep, like the LIGO experiments, another claimed demonstration. All these things that they put forward as claimed demonstrations of reality that are not based on reality. And the other thing that got me thinking too about the Einstein documentary I was watching was how it basically rebuts Newton's theory of gravity. And yet all the people that we're dealing with, all the ballers that we're talking to or just arguing about things with are all making claims based on Newton's theory of gravity. It's one I'm thinking of in particular is the use of theodolites to prove that the horizon does not always come up to eye level, where they show a dip below the crosshairs. I mean, more fudging, more another attempt at trying to make a demonstration that in fact proves nothing.
Yep.
I think that's the important thing. Nothing's proved. All these things, like it said in the start of that article, assertions without proof and rebuttals without proof.
Yep. That's exactly what it is.
They never put forward any proof. There is no proof.
Well, I mean, this general relativity taking over from Newton mechanics description. You know, I mean, the what they always say is that, okay, the general relativity, as you say, is a bigger picture, explains the whole universe, and the Newtonian view is kind of locally correct, if you like. And the general relativity is then the theory of general is supposed to make predictions, which they then go on to try and prove. And these predictions that you're going to see some kind of visible change in the position during an eclipse of some star, right? It's so preposterous, Glenn, right? Because of all the things involved in making that measurement, right? From all the way down to the environment, the equipment, the way light works, the way the optical instruments work, you know, all the way down to the interpretation of the data by a human. Yeah, I mean, what was it? The guy had he got it. He had to double check and double check and double check all these results until he got them right. You know, I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. You know.
No. And that's another thing that gets me too, is so quite often they have these observations and they get some data, and you know yourself that the collating of that data would take, with the equipment that's available today, maybe days. But they have it taking months, years even, to collate some, the position of something on a photographic plate.
Maybe that's just to make it look as if it's real scientific, you know, as if brilliant minds have gone into this and pondered and, you know, for a long time, you know. I mean, I think they were pretty sure of what the result was going to be. They just had to make it look as if it was a real scientific endeavor. Yeah.
I've got this photographic plate. There's a little dot on it here, and it's so many millimeters up from the bottom and so many millimeters from the right. Now I've got to spend months collating that bit of information to be able to present my theory.
And hey presto, we looked at that little dot and hey, it moved a millimeter. Yes, space-time is curved, you know?
Well, actually, it seems to be that these things just happen over and over again, because what you see these days is the boys in the control room jumping up and high-fiving each other, and, you know, there's crowds of people outside cheering and jumping about and carrying on. And it seems to me that that's just a progression of what happened when Einstein's theory was supposedly proved by Eddington. Yep. And even another bit that I hadn't seen before about the orbit of Mercury around the sun. There's some anomaly with that he was supposed to have proven. And when he proved that, the equation that he proved it with was the one we talked about before, with this G sub something equals something something sub something T something, which is, you know, an equation that explains the entire universe again.
Yeah.
and they've got crowds cheering in the street, and all of a sudden Einstein's a theory, and in the documentary they're showing pictures of him with local heads, world heads of government, and all these other scientists and mathematicians. And look,
that's just part of the show, isn't it? I mean, that's also part of the emotional manipulation, as you say. You know, if you get people high-fiving, then you think, well, you know, this must be true. There's an authenticity that comes with that, because, you know, you've been in that position yourself, high-fiving a friend for some achievement, right? So all these things, you know, kind of emotionally manipulate you. You know what I mean, though, right? If whatever.
I have never done that.
Well, it could have been sports or whatever, or something like that.
I know.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And to your point, by the way, these things never get repeated. You know, I mean, it would appear to that. You know, once Eratosthenes puts in some sticks in the ground and measures some shadows, right, or whether Eddington gets a photographic plate, that seems to be it. You know, okay, you've now got some people in YouTube that will try and repeat the experiment, you know. But there's nothing new to the experiment, and we know it's a fallacy. We know it's nonsense, right? There's no real quantification there. There's too many assumptions in all of these things, right? So yeah, but they never seem to repeat it. They just put it right to the history books, write it in as true, and that's it. Nobody ever looks at it anymore, right?
Yeah, I've had dozens of people say to me, but Cavendish proved it, and his experiment has been repeated time and time again, and every time it's done, it shows the same information. And I say to them, okay, show me any of the information. Show me the data, show me a peer-reviewed paper, show me a demonstration of that experiment being done. They can't, they never do.
Nope.
They never come in. I've been sent a couple of links to a couple of YouTubes where
high school physics projects, right? Or people trying to do it or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and the one that I got sent several times was where the bloke was showing the instrument that they'd used, but they'd had to cut it up because it didn't work properly, and he's just showing you the broken pieces of it. It's just absurd.
Well, I mean, they just haven't got anything else, right? All they have is these stories, visible proofs, mental objects. There's absolutely nothing physical. I mean, we know that. So, and as you say, at the end of the day, it's just a show that they have to put on and to use these logical fallacies of, you know, repeat by assertion, you know, or appeal to the stone or flip certain things, right? You know, there's always, you know damn well that whatever they're telling you is true. The exact opposite is the case, right? You know, in a lot. I mean, it's like politics in that respect, isn't it? You know somebody's lying when they say they're telling the truth, you know?
Yeah. Oh, no. How do you know when a politician's lying? He opens his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, for me, it still gets back to repeating myself again, but this whole mathematical measurement stuff. Because at the end of the day, if you know the intellectuals or the scientists of today are still, and when I say scientists, I need to be careful. We're always talking about mathematical, physical, theoretical people. I'm not talking about engineers or real construction folks or, you know, people that do physical, engineerable things, right? That's not what we're talking about. There's nothing wrong with all of that, the whole of that technology and science, but all the people who are still looking at the theoretical side of things, you know, the fact that they really do believe that, you know, looking at these photographic plates is a measurement of a physical space ball, you know, millions of years, light years away, or it's just absolutely preposterous. Absolutely preposterous.
Yep, I agree.
And they don't get it, and they're just they're fully, how should I say, bought into the mathematical physics idea and this whole idea of measurement. And it's not that difficult, you know, to I know we wanted to talk about this, you know, exactly what is mathematics. And before it was arithmetic and geometry, and arithmetic and geometry and let's call it also music and astronomy, then somehow got subsumed into this mathematical thing. So mathematics is all literally about ratios and quantities. It's a doctrine that tries to explain what a quantity is and how to measure a quantity. In terms of a ratio. So you take whatever you take if you're going to measure something, then you have to find some standard of measure. You know, if I was to measure the length of a line, then I need to start with some unit. It could be a ruler, it could be a foot, inches, whatever. And then using that, I then measure the whole line, and I say afterwards, okay, it's 10 of those feet, or it's 10 of those rulers, or it's, you know, so it's just a number, 10, together with a unit which defines the quantity, i.e. the actual length of this line. And a quantity can also be a surface area, a quantity can be a volume. So if I'm looking to find the quantity of a volume of some substance, I need a substance to begin with, right? Otherwise it has no bulk and no volume. And then if it's, I'll take the example of whiskey. If it's a whiskey bottle full of whiskey, then you can say, okay, you can have 30, 5 centiliter glasses that can come out of that, or 50 mouthfuls, right? Which is a wee dram, right? And so all that really is just a number together with a measure defines a quantity, and that's all mathematics is, right? Nobody should be under any illusions that it's any more complicated than that, because within that framework of ratio and units, you can also include the whole of geometry. So geometric figures, like, you know, a triangle, a scalable triangle, can also be fit into that, you know, overall doctrine of a quantity, a ratio, and a measure, right? So you've got one equilateral triangle which can scale up multiple times to become a surface area, right? You know, which is the way they would do geodesics, right? Which is the way they would do all that. So mathematics contains arithmetic and geometry, and it contains our notion of motion and time, i.e., our heartbeats, water clocks, sun going up and down, you know, shadows on the ground, clocks at the end of the day. All these things can be subsumed within this mathematical framework of quantity, ratio, and a measure. And as soon as that, when you abstract it into those kind of three quantities, and you then pick a measure that you cannot possibly know for sure, i.e., a visible in the sky, or an angle of measurement, without knowing the physical, you know, ball that's supposed to be there in the case of Spaceballs, or any physicality, then you're free to make a whole story with this mass, ratio, and quantity based on this measure that you've defined. And if you believe in this measure, then you believe in everything else that comes from it. And that's where the scientists are today. You know, they've got this mathematical concept in their head, the way mathematics works. They've defined a measure which they take to be true. And then that's it. For the next 100 years, we're all going to be looking at photographic plates, thinking that we're proving that space-time is warped. I mean, it frustrates me, Glenn, how mathematicians can just go through believing all that without questioning it at any given point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like when we were talking previously about the geometry of visibles.
Yep.
How the mathematicians haven't attended to it. They don't.
Yep.
They don't think about it. They don't look into it.
Yep.
It's something that is a real. It is real, but nobody's ever looked into it. Nobody's ever. Well, I probably a bit ridiculous to say nobody has, but in general, it's not a subject that's. Well, the only people I know who talk about it are you and me. But
well, they've moved it, haven't they? I mean, they've moved it away from the domain of mathematics and geometry and natural science, which is where it should be placed, because this is all about us experiencing a visible and a physical world and explaining it. So it has everything to do with biology, with chemistry, with physics, with you know these things. You know, we shouldn't be away from that. It's now in the realms of psychology, neuroscience, and stuff, you know, that is very subjective in a lot of ways. Because if you're looking at a whole bunch of people having a perception of something, then, you know, two people are going to have different perceptions depending on whether you're ill, whether you're impaired, whether you're, you know, in the circumstances you're in, the environment you're in. So it just, that's what frustrates me. There's no objectivity there, right? They've moved that whole discussion into a kind of subjective arena where you can argue about lots of things. But we shouldn't be. We should be looking at the objective facts of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, look, they'll even agree that mathematics proves nothing. But that's why they try to bring these so-called demonstrations into it. They try to conflate this idea of a demonstration being real, being reality, being brought into their mathematical world, so that the math is just a description of, or a way of describing or measuring or showing how this demonstration works, which is not what's going on at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a way of, I believe, a deliberate attempt to make mathematics more real, more about the real world than it actually is.
Yep.
There was a little, I posted it earlier, this one little quote from that Einstein documentary. Suddenly he realizes all this abstract nonsense is the correct theory of reality.
Preposterous statement. Yeah.
And that's a well-known modern physicist making that statement. You know, these guys, I don't get it. I don't get where critical thinking's gone out the window. They all believe in their fairy stories.
Yeah, and especially in education, I think, you know, it's just there's no stepping outside of that kind of educational framework, right? You go to school, you get your degree, you then start to teach, you know, and you just stay in that bubble of you know, without having any real challenge to it, right? You've just got buddy peer review. We talked about that the last time too, you know, where there's
Yep.
no real such thing. It's all people invested in keeping their jobs going, keeping their research projects up and running, you know, not rocking the boat by challenging anything. So yeah, I think these people are not deceiving per se. They're just like naive children, you know. That's what it's like for me.
And I believe terrified.
Mm.
And I truly mean terrified. I think it is a form of terrorism that's being used to lock these people into their positions. If they want to survive, if they've got a family that they've got to look after and provide for, they're not going to rock the boat, even if something smacks them square between the eyes. It's like with the surveyors, and like you said before, engineers, all these people that know that the stuff that we're talking about actually fits in with their day-to-day experience of what they're doing. Like a surveyor knows that he goes out and does planar Euclidean surveying. He knows that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
But then he knows that then he has to put his data into a particular format and into a computer program, and then it gets sent off so that mathematical mumbo jumbo can be worked upon it. They can do their geodesic magic with it, and take that planar Euclidean data and somehow or another make it look like it's on a sphere.
Yep, they'll just turn straight lines into the great circles, obfuscate the fact that, you know, that only works if you're at the center of a sphere looking at stuff directly. Yeah. And then, you know, they'll hide the excess and the to the curve, right? The excess or the defect, that's what it's called. The difference of a straight line to a curve. They'll hide that with well, it's locally flat. Yeah, you just can't see it on a big scale. I mean, it's such a simple con that, and even though, as you say, everybody realizes and lived life that that's not the way it is. That it is all level, locally flat, plumb bobs. You know, that's the way life works. You know, they'll still go away kind of with this cognitive dissonance, looking at the curve and putting it into a mathematical, and then basically at the end of the day, the thing will spit it out. You know, round it up, and it'll be the same. You know, the same result as the Euclidean one. But you believe that this bit in the middle with the sphere and the ball is all true. It's, you know, I wish I'd slap them sometimes, these people.
Well, a canal builder, somebody who's designing and building canals, he has to know. And from my understanding is that the majority of them would admit that they never ever fit curvature calculations into their equations, into their
nonsense. Absolutely preposterous to think that they would have to do that. Lunacy.
Well, see that. Yeah, they're real measurements. That's where measurements are being, where the quantities that are being measured fit reality.
Yeah, that's the real engineerable, constructible stuff. Right, water is the best example. You know, that is a real measure, you know, dependent on a natural substance that has known properties that will not fucking change, never do change, and have no possibility of changing. You know, it doesn't matter what you write on the blackboard. Yeah. It's just.
I like what you said about ratios, where, you know, in mathematics, we have a situation where you can actually apply to reality if you're using quantities proper quantities that we know about, like a foot that's maybe originally based on the length of the human foot.
Yep.
You know, the
Or a
time
hand span for horses. Horses get measured in spans, right?
Yeah, yeah, or hands.
Yeah, or hands. Yeah, sorry. Yep, yep.
Yeah. But you were saying that what they've done with mathematics is actually made ratio one of those quantities that they are applying ratios to. They're applying ratios to ratios. And once you start doing that, you're into a conceptual wonderland.
That's it. That's exactly right. Yep. You know, in the old days, there was these 5 proper things: lines, surfaces, volumes, number, and time. And any one of those individual things could only be measured in terms of itself. Lines with lines, surfaces with surfaces, and you would find that unit and that measure. And you know, wherever your piece of land would be, you know, you could call it square feet or square meters, doesn't matter. So you have these 5 things which can all be expressed in terms of themselves. And ratio also happens, because it's just a number or 2 numbers, you know, one on top of each other, because it's just a number itself, can also be expressed in terms of itself. So a ratio can be expressed in terms of ratios. So they've included that into the proper things. And as soon as you do that, as you say, you can then, you know, use any ratio and go into Wonderland and talk about it. Because especially if you just define a measure which nobody else can prove or, you know, practically demonstrate, and then on top of that you're playing with numbers. I mean, it's that simple. That's all maths is about.
Playing with numbers.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you can reduce everything to number, everything to that ratio or a number expressed, a number that together with the unit will give you the quantity of the thing. 10 whiskey bottles, 5 square meters, 3 centimeters. You know, so there's always a number and a unit, and that's all a quantity ever is. But it has to be tied to substantial things. As soon as you start positing a measure that is not physical, i.e., that it's a visible entity or a mental entity, I mean, you can make up anything and put any numbers in front of it. You know what I mean? And that's all mathematical physics is.
How does that fit in with Hume and Berkeley and the other idealists? They're measuring immaterial quantities.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some mathematical tricks in there, the ghosts of departed quantities. When you start talking about infinitesimals or infinitely countable points that are in between 2 different, you know, in between an interval, then you can play with the same mathematical trickery to try to actually think that you're proving something, you know, to the limit of whatever. Adding those numbers, you're going to hit 2. So, you know, that's taken to be some kind of gospel, but everybody's forgetting that within that, there's a lot of mathematical trickery going on. I don't know how easier to put it without diving too deep here, but...
Well, it's sort of like we were talking about going halfway somewhere. If you keep just going half the distance and then you go half that distance again and half that distance again and then half that distance again, you're never, ever going to get to where you're going.
Yeah, which is obviously untrue.
Yeah.
You know? It's the same as the tortoise and the hare, isn't it? Where, you know, for the hare to catch the tortoise, it has to get to the place where the tortoise was. But in that time, the tortoise has already moved, right? So, and again, when he starts from that position to catch the tortoise and he gets to the place where the tortoise was when he started, again, the tortoise has just moved. So he never catches the tortoise, which is, again, you know, just one of these kind of paradoxes that is based on a bad understanding of mathematics, or sorry, an understanding that mathematics is somehow reality, which is not, because we all know that, you know, you bang your nose when you hit the wall, you know.
Yeah. So, and you know that he does catch that the hare does catch the tortoise.
Yep. Yeah, and these things are again seem to be little analogies to try and solidify the mathematical thinking, but lead us further astray again from real world experiences. So
yeah. So what we're really trying to do is to work out why mathematics has the power that it does, how it's been absolutely instrumental in getting people to believe in absurdities.
Yep. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you look at some natural laws and experiences, and you write down an equation and you make a prediction, then there are a lot of, again, all these engineerable things.
Yeah.
Show that mathematics is a very powerful tool. It's just when mathematics gets misused to things that are not properly quantifiable is when it should be looked at. That's where we should be stopping our, endeavors, right? And saying, well, hold on, that's you moving into a metaphysical thing that we can't properly measure. So, we need to discount that. That cannot be taken as real. One of the good one was the little dram we talked about. Sorry, on you go.
Yeah, no, you go.
I'm just going to share the screen there for the wee dram because I thought this was quite a good example of it. So when you say, what is a dram, right? And people say, we all know, it all depends. Here's, for example, just one. We all know a dram is a drink of whiskey, but how much whiskey is it? It all depends on where you are and who you're drinking with, right? Now, in that respect, you could think that, a dram of whiskey is a very subjective thing, right? It depends on a lot of different variables, and I don't know, it would seem to me to be no longer objective. But if you look, it says here as well, it isn't an official measurement. A dram is most often referred to as any amount of whiskey that you could swallow in one mouthful. Now, that for me seems to be a much, how should I say, clearer, better understood way of defining it, because everybody knows what a mouthful is. We all know how difficult it is to swallow a mouthful and what happens physiologically. You'll have a gasp of air afterwards, exhaling, right, after you swallow. So we can all make that discernment. We can all measure that. Yeah, you might have a bigger mouth than me, but that doesn't detract from the fact that this is a measurement that everybody can share, right? But the idea that it all really depends on what you think and who you're drinking with, I don't know. It just seems to me to not be clear enough. And I wish that all measurement was done on the basis of a constitutional thing, right? Of real substance, real people, sentient beings involved, and everybody being able to share that experience properly. But when they talk about visible objects in the sky and you need special equipment to see it and special mathematics to describe it, and the rest of you are too stupid, that's when we just, we're left believing in authorities, right? Or in somebody's opinion that has more weight than somebody else's, or, all these, heroes and clowns that they present to us, we're supposed to believe them rather than our own constitution.
Yeah, well, that's where they came up with the astronomical unit.
Yep.
as a measurement. It's a concept based on what? It's a concept based on a theory. It's a concept based on what?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was supposed to be the unit with which you can then measure galactic or solar, or intergalactic distances, right? Using this astronomical unit. And, you show me what an astronomical unit is. Give me a practical demonstration of an astronomical unit. They can't do that. I've got a perfectly good example of a dram, right?
No, it's the distance between the Earth and the Sun.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. How could I forget that? And how did they infer that again? All right, they assume Spaceballs to begin with, right, and then assume that we're going round it and measuring at 2 different times of the year to yeah. Got you.
Didn't it also have something to do with the what do you call it? The transition of Venus across the face of the Sun at some point in time. There's another way that it's ridiculous.
It's like, again, we've said this many times, like trying to explain, how the Star Trek warp drive works. I don't pay any attention to it anymore. I've looked at it. All these wee stories are just there to chase you down rabbit holes. The main thing to as you say, to note is that an astronomical unit is not something that can be measured per se, right? They're pretending they can. They're pretending that they're taking Venus transits and pictures, and with all their assumptions that they've got, they look as if they're producing real results. But there's absolutely nothing physically measurable about that. There's no quod erat demonstrandum in it whatsoever.
No, and actually, King's Dethroned is an interesting, that Jared Hickson book has an interesting story about how that came about. It's an interesting sort of story about how absurdity upon absurdity upon absurdity has been made into a history of the distance from the Earth to the Sun.
Yep.
And it is just absolutely ridiculous. You can see it was done because they needed a big unit. They
Yep.
had to have a big unit to start with, because to make their story sound real, like in the evolution stories, it's time. There's billions of years required to make the so-called changes. For the system of the solar system to work, for orbital mechanics to work, we need big numbers. So they needed a big unit to start with.
Yeah, because and that also ties into the fact that you need a big baseline if you're going to take an angular measurement, a visual measurement. I mean, it's like surveying in that respect. You know, if you're looking at very small triangles, like, you know, very small, you know, acute triangles, then the error in that, so that your base has to be bigger so that the triangle that you're supposed to be measuring is bigger, and that's the reason they have to postulate this big, you know, big baseline to make it work. Otherwise, the errors in all the readings would not allow them to make any predictions whatsoever. Yeah.
Actually, Hickson goes into that in. There's a couple of good diagrams and a good description of how they set up that baseline, and he shows how it's absolutely ridiculous because, you know, it's based on objects actually moving positions, so that, you know, the first reading can be taken when the Earth's in this location, and then the second reading is taken when the Earth's in this location. And he shows that with all the movements that would have taken naturally, you know, assuming that the solar system's orbital mechanics were real, that the movements made would mean that baseline would never exist. It's not a baseline that exists in one moment in time.
Yep.
It just can't be. It can't be done.
Yep, and I mean that's even if you give them their assumption that, you know, you can look at things relatively just in the orbit, and that it's a circular orbit we're making, but it's not. We know that it's that's what they tell us. Well, I say we know. We certainly don't know that nonsense. But, you know, they say it's a helical cycling and everything's moving, so, you know, it's more of a spiral motion. There's no closed orbit whatsoever. It's an open helix. Yeah. So even that doesn't fit their nonsense of a baseline.
And even if it was not traveling like that, even if it was a closed ellipse, the fact that the orbit of the Earth around the Sun is supposedly elliptical would mean that there would be changes in speed. There'd be accelerations and decelerations all the time.
Yeah.
And their claim is that the reason that we don't feel the speed is because of constant motion. Well, there's no constant motion.
No.
So that's just another fairy story.
And again, all based, you know, that astronomical unit based on a measure, a unit that you cannot, you know, physically validate, verify, right? Because we can't get there. They can tell us stories that they can, you know, but we know that that's just stories. And then based on that, you know, making measurements based on that unit, and the whole thing, it's just so off track. I just wish that the scientists would look at that and understand that where they have to look at is their fundamental belief in a measurement, their fundamental beliefs in mathematical physics. If you can take that away from most of the theoretical scientists out there, then you would leave them with absolutely nothing, Glenn. Absolutely nothing. No experiment, no practical demonstration. All they have to cling to is that mathematical physics definition of quantities and measurements.
I was just looking at the note I wrote. Mathematical physics is defining a measure of a substance, then ascribing a ratio to a quantity of the substance.
That's right. Yeah.
Mathematics allows the expression of ratios in terms of other ratios. Thus, ratio is claimed as a proper quantity. Yeah, we've already discussed that. Actually, I was thinking too, I've actually written here shot glass. And I'm thinking about, okay, Dram as a measurement of whiskey. A shot is also a measurement of whiskey.
Yeah.
And they actually have glasses called shot glasses.
Right.
So what have they determined is the quantity? How many milliliters in a shot glass? Or how many
Is it usually 2 centiliters? Is usually taken as a kind of base in a whiskey glass? I'm, to be honest, not sure. I think it's 2 centiliters. I might be wrong. But is that a shot then as well? And I don't know where the word shot came from.
I'm just looking it up. Images for shot glasses. Is a shot 1 ounce or 1.5 ounces? Shot glasses are small glasses that are designed to hold liquids in measurements of 25 milliliters to 50 milliliters. Shot glasses are most widely known as a drinking glass, though they can also be used as a jigger measure when making cocktails.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I suppose the glass holds more, but I think when you hold the whiskey glass up to the bottle and you push the little what's it called? Forgotten, but you know what I mean. Then it only lets out a certain amount, and I thought that was always 2 or 3 centiliters or something. So yeah.
Well,
But
2 or 3 centiliters. That 25 mil is 2.5 centiliters. So
yeah. That's about right.
Off track a bit there, I suppose, but it's still a measurement.
But yeah, it's a real measurement. It's something we can all agree on, right? It's something we can all, experience for ourselves. It's something, again, that's physical, that's substantial, that's, tied to us and our constitution. And that's what all measurements should be. If I'm going to be taking things as proof, as evidence of being real, it has to be that, right? And as soon as we wander into metaphysical measurements that nobody can validate, unless you've got white coats and letters after your name and special equipment, then we're just leaving ourselves open to being told bullshit.
Well, it's even worse.
But common sense keeps us honest, is what I say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that was an interesting thing in that article we were reading about how they were claiming that common sense is what tells people they live on a sphere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, remember, I think at the end of the last conversation, you mentioned that you've got a problem with this word belief. And so that's maybe a good talking point to have as well. So from the point of view of a direct realist, when or at least my interpretation of it, when you have a perception of something, so let's say I'm looking at a tree outside the door, and I've got this visible image of the tree, and I know that if I walk to the tree, then I can kick the tree the same way Johnson kicked the stone, right? Then I know that that is a real physical thing out there. And my perception of that tree now immediately gives me a belief, and I'm saying this quite harshly, it gives me a belief that that tree is real. And that, for me, is part of my constitution, because I know the visible and the tangible thing, looking at it, going to it, and physically touching it, is something that I can believe in, right? So I don't have the power. I don't have the power to refute that. It's kind of irrefutable, right? It's not in my power to reject that belief, is what I'm saying, because it's an innate part of the way I function, right? So, it's nonsense to say that I don't have beliefs, because if you like, that is a belief that's so ingrained in me that it's impossible for me to refute, right?
I agree.
I think that's the only belief I hold. The only belief I hold is that there is a real external world outside there, and my constitution tells me that it is so. And there's no way I can reject that belief. It would be, because if I did reject it, then again, I would end up worrying about how to walk across the road, Glenn.
I believe that if I step in front of that bus, I will be killed.
Yeah. I mean, we can agree on that, right? That is a belief. I mean, I wouldn't go any further than that. Any other belief that people tell me, hearsay, opinion, But
no, I still believe I still believe a belief has to be based on reality. It has to be based on a fact. It can't be based on hearsay. It can't be based on. I think it's like the word truth. It gets bandied about all the time, and people seem to have their own meanings for it. You know, the concept that everybody has their own truth. Well, you can sort of explain that in a way. You know, like because that person believes something is true, and somebody else believes it is true. You can sort of say that they have different truths, but I disagree. I think that's a misuse of the word truth. I think the belief is what comes in there. That person believes in a particular truth, and that other person believes in another truth. The fact of the matter is there is only one truth about any subject. It's either true or it's false. Something's either there or it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, take the case in the example of a wee dram, right? I mean, we can all objectively agree that there is a liquid there in a glass, right? But if you take it to your lips and I take it to my lips, we might have subjective opinions about the taste, the texture, right? How nice it is, how much of a mouthful it was, right? But we're still not going to get away from the objective fact that there's a fluid there that we're partaking of, yeah.
Well, with you having such a giant mouth and mine being so small, when we both put up into our glasses the same size glass, I'd say, that's a dram. You'd be saying, no, it's only half a dram.
That's just a nibble.
No, half a dram. Apply a ratio to it.
If we apply a ratio to it, then I could say it's half a dram. Give me double. Give me double of your drams. I want a half a dozen of your drams. Yeah, there you go. You can using ratio. You can whatever unit you measure. Again, it could be a dram, it could be a shot, it could be bottles. You know, I mean that's the different narratives that can then be told for one and the same thing, right? I drunk a 30th of a bottle of whiskey yesterday. Yeah. No, you didn't. You had a wee dram.
Yeah. Or in the case of our sort of things, I drank a bottle of whiskey the other day, the whole 20 grams. And you say, no, 10 grams.
Yeah.
I drank a bottle of whiskey and it had 10 grams.
Exactly, but objectively the same thing. The bottle's empty, right? But we've just expressed ourselves in different terms of measurement. And again, that's
which
exactly
which is what mathematics can do.
Yep, absolutely. And the thing is, it doesn't matter what ratio you choose, what table of proportions that you set up that you choose, because we're both correct, right?
Yeah.
The bottle's still empty.
Yeah.
It's been, for you or for me, 10 drams, and for you, it's been 30 shots, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well.
Sorry, on you go.
When we, I was sort of coming back to when you were talking about straight lines. If we look at a line on a great circle from the center of our eye, it becomes a straight line, when in actual fact we know that it's a curved line.
Yep.
Or we might know that it's a curved line. It made me, when you mentioned that, I started thinking, I'd forgotten about it, about going back to the switcheroo in a way, where we're talking about, maybe that's still the critical issue, is that the way we're talking about it in general terms at the moment, the way that mathematics is not proof of anything other than itself.
Yep.
The next step is to point out how that's actually happened with this spherical versus planar world, how they've been able to use that difference in geometry to create basically two sets of mathematics, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that was alluded to in 1984 in that George Orwell book as well. You know, I can remember some phrase along the lines of, you know, do you think it's beyond our scientist Winston to invent dual mathematical physics, which could explain it both ways, you know? And yeah, so I think that's what they've done in many respects. Yeah, they've held up these two narratives. The fact that geometry can be subsumed within mathematics because it's again a quantity and a ratio of shapes, yeah, to each other. It means that they can then, you know, use that mathematical sophistry to explain away these geometric things, yeah, and pretend that spheres are balls, right? To pretend great circles are straight lines, and it's really just an axiomatic change and a different wording that that they've used.
And that pi is a variable.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Which you don't hear of. They don't actually mention it much, but in their geometry, it definitely is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Depends on, you know, the pi is the ratio of circumference to diameter. And depending on the way you define how you measure a diameter, which is in the spherical version is from the equator line up over the North Pole down the other side. Yeah. So that if you've then got a circle of latitude, which is higher, then going from that circle line up over the North Pole to the other side gives you a different diameter than if you were starting from the equator. So that if the diameter changing, then circumference over diameter is not the same anymore. It's not the same ratio. It goes from 2 to 4, depending on the way you measure it. Yeah.
I've always found that a really interesting subject. That was one of the things that first intrigued me when you started talking about the spherical geometry.
There's a paper on the public drive that's on that topic anyway.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there is too.
I don't know if it's worth repeating in a video maybe one day or going through the paper, but yeah, but just to come back to this belief stuff, you know, so I really do think that, you know, if you have to start from first principles. So the skeptic will always say, yeah, but you can't prove that it's an external world, and we're back to then these philosophical discussions of immaterialism and Berkeley, you know, to be is to be perceived, right? You know, their famous motto, and you know, I just find that it just doesn't hold water with me at all. You know, just to prove a point. You know.
You know what I would have done with Berkeley?
Drowned him.
Boof.
Yeah.
Boof. Feel that.
Yeah. Feel that. Yeah. Did you feel my fist in your face, Bishop? Yeah. Yeah, and you have to believe that you have to start from a first principle. So, you know, if you go down that route of you know, pure skepticism, saying that you can never prove anything really outside your own mind, right, then you end up as Reed would have pointed out, on the barren rocks of skepticism. There's no, you know, you can't do anything anymore, right? You have to deny everything, you know, and you go into this kind of nihilistic mode of, fuck, I'll never know. It's all, you know. Whereas, you know, if as a direct realist, you would start from the very first principle of your constitution and base everything from that. And if you don't do that, then you can't live properly. You can't survive properly. So we know all these things are necessary. Yeah, and you know, that's where you can have a foundation and a rooting and build on top of that. Whereas immaterialism and idealism just leaves you as the you know, eternal skeptic.
Well, I was just thinking, I would put it in terms of, as a realist, believing in direct realism, you've got somewhere to go. As an immaterial idealist, you've got nowhere to go.
Yeah. Yeah. You have literally got nowhere to go. Yeah, and it's a good point, you know. Is that what they want? Is if we've got nowhere to go, then we don't explore, we don't inquire? Yeah.
Well, that seems to be part of the whole concept of getting us to believe that we live on in a very precarious situation that we need them to protect us from.
Yep.
That we live on this tiny pale blue dot in the middle of nowhere that's traveling at horrendous speeds as it rotates, hurtling around these exploding, well, because they're apparently stars are nuclear explosions happening slowly.
Yeah, please give me a space force to protect me from this horrible thing. Give me dreams of getting off this planet. Show me more science fiction films, more movies. Yeah. No, I agree totally. And if you believe you're on the outside of a spinning ball, then you literally have nowhere to go. So it definitely keeps our minds, how should I say, occupied, right? And our physical bodies contained and confined, because there's that acquiescence. There's that, what was it? I just had quite a nice phrase with it yesterday. Outrage, is dead and buried, but his little brother apathy is alive and well. And that, that they've got us into that mindset, keeping us there, right? Because of the story they're telling us. It's clever, no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt that the people who perpetuated or began this story and who continue it are very, very clever. But they're clever because they've worked out a way of stupefying the human race. Because that, to me, is what's happened. It's the fact that there are so few people, and I think we've actually asked the question before: what's different about us? We did believe the things these people believed, but how come we're able to accept that we were wrong?
I don't think there's anything special about us, because again, I know that everybody has the same. No, I know you weren't saying that. I just wanted to repeat the fact that because we've all got the same constitution, everybody is capable of making the same discernments we are making. But it's exactly that. Why are they not discerning? Because I've said this before as well. That discernment is also an office or a faculty that we come with, right? And I think that's part of the natural package too. If I see an apple, then okay, I intuitively understand there's only one of them. If you bring another apple to the party, then I intuitively understand that there's two of them. But there's obviously differences between apples and oranges, which I also immediately start to think about when I see an object. I'll automatically start to think about comparing, relating between the two. So that would seem to be something also ingrained within us, not just the ability to discern and have a perception of an apple, right, and to feel and to touch it, but also to immediately start comparing it with the rest of the stuff that's out there, right? And that comparison seems to be being subdued. It's like, okay, here, just look at the apple. Don't, it's like the magician's trick. Just look at this. Don't get the rest of your faculties involved in, understanding more about this apple and where it is and what it's doing and what the differences are. That all just seems to disappear. You just get fed the story about what the apple is, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that sort of explains why when you talk to some people, or a lot of people, that they don't want to talk about any of the other stuff. Oh, that's beyond me. I don't understand that stuff. I don't want to know.
I don't want to know is a big one.
That?
I agree. I don't want to know. Get me back to the football. Get me in front of the Super Bowl, or whatever.
For me, that's totally changed now. I want to know. I want to look at all these things. I want to.
Yep, it doesn't.
Question things.
It wakes up our inquisitive nature, isn't it? And that's definitely been subdued. And I'm sure there's multiple tricks in there. I couldn't point to one individual thing. From education to fluoride in your water. I'm not even sure if that's true. I've never drank enough fluoride to know whether it subdues me, to be honest. But even if I take that on as a fact, I'm sure that there's multiple ways that they subdue our inner nature.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that at all. The thing about education being used to do it is, I'm absolutely convinced about that sort of idea, because I think busing, I don't know, I think I've discussed it with you before, but the whole idea, people say to me, isn't it fantastic that the government sends the buses out here into these rural areas so that the kids all get the same education, that that no child's left behind, that everybody's got the same opportunities. And it's always couched in those sort of discussions. Nobody ever thinks about it in terms of their children being taken off to an indoctrination camp. They're being removed from the reality, from the real world where they would learn the basics of life, and being taken into an institution where they will be fed the same dogmatic story that every other child in the nation is being indoctrinated with. It's, in a way, it's a horrifying situation. I look at the buses when they go past here, and I think those poor kids.
It's like little kids, you know, behind bars, isn't it? You can almost hear them screaming to get out. I know, I want to go out and play with the world, you know, and I'm being carted off in this fucking enclosed, you know, mobile prison, you know, that takes them, as you say, to an indoctrination camp, so that they all have a consistent education, right? So everybody's getting told the same story. There's no room for people to, you know, come with different opinions and different views. It's like, you know, let's make sure that they're, you know, completely enclosed from anything else, and we can fully indoctrinate them all at once. You know, and they can feed off each other then, you know.
It was a long time ago, and I remember very little about my childhood. I don't have any real memories of me as a little person, except for the first day of school. And I remember I did not want to be there.
Yeah.
I wanted my best to get back in the car with Mum and go home.
Yeah.
I did not want to be there. That's one memory that stuck with me.
No, there you go. You intuitively knew something was fucking wrong, yeah, even if your parents didn't, you know. Yeah.
Well, that's the same situation today. Parents just don't realise what they're doing. I mean, that's another
part. Well, I
mean,
one of the things, though, to point out is that people are choosing to believe that, right? We can't take away from the fact that it's, you know, okay, yes, there are people with an agenda trying to force something, but still, people are making the active choice to put their children into these camps, right? Or making, you know, scientists are making an active choice to believe a specific measurement. So in a way, it is, you know, we're getting those, as Dale would say, getting those products offered to us, and we're buying into it. So, you know, we can't excuse ourselves from the problem, right? Even though there's a lot of nefarious going on. No.
Yeah, I sort of struggle with that a little bit sometimes, because if you lack knowledge, if you don't understand, it's like trying to explain Agenda 21 to anybody now.
Yeah.
You know, you can give them the book, you can go back and you can show interviews with Maurice Strong and the claims he was making when he first started setting up. I think it was global warming I think it was global cooling he started with. And you can see that you can see the beginnings of the agenda, the construction of the agenda. You can explain to people, you can read sections of it where it makes claims about what they will do. One in particular that I was explaining to somebody yesterday was about how they'd use this Delphi technique of getting people to believe that they're having a say in their local community's future. And they basically, these guys have already got the plan in place. They've already got exactly what they want, the way they want things to go to happen. And yet they call a community meeting. You see signs put up all over the town, banners and people in little things in the local newspaper. Come to the local meeting, have your say about your town's future. And all that stuff is written about in the beginnings of Agenda 21. They describe exactly what they're going to do. And if you look at it, you're going to have a look at what's going on at the moment, it's exactly what's happening.
Yep.
And you can see where we're going. You can see where the world's going.
Yep. Yep. That's a good point. Yep.
It's a bit off track, isn't it? But,
no, but it's not in a way. It's all about, you know, how do we get conned, and, you know, how come people accept those beliefs, and how come people are not discerning properly what's being said. And yeah, I mean, there's no immediate way to solve it apart from creating the spark of inquiry in everybody. You know, I mean, I think that's where it starts, isn't it? Throwing these little bits out, getting people thinking for themselves, and then that spark comes back to them, because we all have it. and it's just a matter of, I don't know, lighting it or getting it going.
Yeah.
I wish
Well,
there was a patent recept for it though, but there's not.
No, it's probably like we were talking about earlier about the trying to get people to understand the reality of what mathematics actually is and how it's a magnificent tool, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
And then people believing that it's actually an explanation of reality. How that has come about because of this whole concept of, I hate saying the term, but it is really mind control. It really is about capturing the minds of human beings.
Yep.
I really don't think there's any other way of putting it, because, and then you could start getting into a discussion of what's the mind. And that's why I think people should read something like Read, an inquiry into the human mind. It starts giving you a bit of an idea of that faculty that is our reality, who we really are.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the fact that if you do control the minds of people, then you do then control their bodies, right? Their physical movements, their, where they want to do their, exploration. So, it has to be for them all about capturing the mind first, because, the mind is where our will and our intents and our desires, are formulated at least. So, if they have that under control, then they also have us immobile if they want, right? Or doing things that they want us to do, which is what's happening. So they've done it.
Yeah.
They've managed to capture the minds.
Think about what they did with the world wars.
Yeah.
They were able to control the minds of human beings to the extent that they would kill each other.
Yep.
That they would be involved in mass exterminations, mass genocides.
Yep.
That people can actually do those sorts of things. And I truly believe that is not part of natural human behaviour. It's not something that comes naturally to us. We've been led to believe that it is, that, the survival of the fittest mechanism and stuff like that is always going to, and I think that's probably one of the mechanisms within us that's been used. But yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you're quite right. I don't think it comes either, Glenn. All this talk about us, if evil is inherent, I think we've touched on this as well. I just don't see it. I look at a child, I don't see, I look at a newborn baby, I don't see anything that could possibly point to the fact that it was going to be evil and malicious or, any of those things, right? So none of it makes sense to me that we're supposed to be this kind of evil. And I think it is all just acquired, how should I say, education and brainwashing that turns us into people that are defending ideals and beliefs that have nothing objective about them. So off to war, right, for man and king and country and all that pish, It's horrific that they can make us do it, but I just don't see anything evil within the individual person, right, necessarily. So
no, me neither.
Maybe we should stop it here, just so that we've got I don't know, I think we've been at it for an hour probably or something, so I'll maybe just stop this one here and we can upload this. I wouldn't know what to call this video. Maybe something like philosophy, Einstein, and a wee dram.
Why not? Or just rambling.